Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and we're back with another remaster change, this time for the Wizard, which I do know from the last video a lot of you were pretty excited for. And I gotta say, honestly, my list of changes for Wizard is actually bigger than Witch, but I will state as well, this is kind of more of like a patch in the sense that many things just kind of got changed, a few things got a little tweaked. I would say mostly Wizards stayed the same except for the curriculums versus spell schools, which I'll go into in this video. There's a lot, and I will also state as well, one of the biggest changes you could arguably say for Wizard is just the changes to some of the major spells in the game, and while I do agree, I am holding off on the spell change video until next week at some point, mostly because if I do it in this video, it'll make it super long. And while some of you might want a super long video, a lot of people are going to be jumping into Pathfinder now that the remaster has come out. And so I want this kind of content to be as approachable as much as possible to those people. So that being the case, today we're only going to be talking about what changed for the Wizard and what you all can expect moving forward. And as well, I'll state before I kind of get into it that if you like this kind of content, please leave a like and subscribe, as I'm going to be doing content every day this week and next week. I'm going to be pumping out so much content for this, talking about every little thing and answering as many questions as possible. And if you don't want to miss a single video, you can jump down into the description where you can find a link to our Discord where you'll get a notification anytime the channel goes live. But that being the case, let's get to Wizard and what changed. So, arguably one of the best changes, in my opinion, is the change to Wizard, like weapon proficiency. Before, it was just a struggle to remember what wizards could use versus could not use, and now they simply just have simple weapon proficiency. Honestly, it removes a big headache, and it's something that is just like not many wizards were going the melee route, I have to add, but it was just something where it was just it felt very random, and it was just because it was a lot of holdovers from older editions of both D&D and Pathfinder. Now they just simply get simple weapon proficiency. Honestly, really simple change, but it does make a difference for especially the early game when you do need to rely on weapons a little bit more because your cantrips might not be set up for combat, or your damage types, like you might be like a fire wizard and you come up against an enemy that's rather resistant. You want to be able to use some kind of weapons. Overall, this just removes a lot of headaches, in my opinion, and I think was a relatively good change. Other than that, base wizard stats did not change. Same amount of health, still use intelligence, all that kind of stuff. There is also, so a big part of today's video is mostly just going to be me telling you that names have changed for certain things in the wizard spell list. A good example is the metamagical experimentation has been changed to experimental spell shaping. In a sense, anytime metamagic would be mentioned, spell shape takes the new name, and they just change some things around. So it still works the same, but now it's just called experimental spell shaping. Very simple. Let's get into the curriculums, which is the biggest part and the biggest change overall to the wizards. Now, no longer are there spell categories where wizards have specific proficiencies in all spells of that category. Now, there is actual schools or types of schools that your wizard goes to learn specific themes of magic. For instance, the first school we're going to look at, School of Ars Grammatica, is a school that works with runes, words, numbers, letters, anything of kind of written script wise for magic in consideration. And I'm not going to get into it, right? This is just a very hotly debated topic, whether people like it versus don't like it. If you want to know my opinions, I like the idea that they flesh out the schools a lot more. So now it feels like your character actually went to a wizarding school rather than just being like, oh yeah, we all studied only evocation, because like any level of education you would do in like the real world especially has a big base of a lot of different subjects that help support your specialization in some form or fashion. This just makes sense. Other than that, though, everyone's gonna have their ideas on it. I like the schools in general. And speaking of the schools, let's talk about how the curriculum spell slots normally work. And it's the same as specialization, so you don't really have to worry about it. But there was a bit of misinformation during Ronald's look at the spell school stuff for curriculum spells specifically. I'm going to highlight a specific part right here that says spell slots. So each day you can prepare one extra cantrip from your curriculum. You also gain an extra spell slot at each spell rank for which you have wizard spell slots. You can only prepare spells from your school's curriculum in these extra slots. Any spell listed in your curriculum of suitable spell rank is eligible to be prepared in each of these slots, regardless of how you added that spell to your spell book. Now, Ronald was confused because we can see here under the School of Ars Grammatica. Oh, actually, let me move my camera. I did this wrong last time. I just want to move out of the way so that you can still see my face. I can still show information on the screen. And another thing before we continue on with the video, I also wanted to thank Paizo for sending me a copy of the PDFs of the player court and the GM course so I could get all this stuff compiled and ready for you guys for when the embargo dropped. Now, this video, of course, is not sponsored by Paizo. They only gave me a complimentary set as one of their reviewers, and all my thoughts and opinions are my own for this video. Just thought you guys should know, considering people do want to be upfront about this. You can also find this information down below in the description. So, let's go ahead and continue on with the wizard. So, anyway, Schools of Ars Grammatica. You can see here that it adds for your first level, you get Command Disguise, Disguise Magic. There's a lot of spells that change names. It's Disguise still. Runic Body, Runic Weapon, right? And Runic Body and Runic Weapon are spells that are intended to be heightened as they get better as you level up, and they're essentially Magic Weapon and Mage Armor. Now, Ronald was confused, and he thought that you could only apply them to that first level slot. But actually, if you get higher level slots, as long as the spell has a heightened form, it can be heightened into the suitable slot. Now, that's what it means, So you can still heighten Runic Weapon as you level up, if you so choose, for your extra slot in Schools of Ars Grammatica specifically. I think he was just confused by the whole idea of a spell of suitable spell rank is eligible to be prepared in each slot, and interpreted that as any spell in that curriculum's spell slot. But technically, heightened spells are also eligible. That was the same thing with specializations as well. So it's the same thing. You don't have to worry about that. But going back to the ad Grammatica or Ars Grammatica school, it is generally a list of a variety of, it's hard to say really, because you can look here at the school spells specifically that gives you Protective Words, which was from Abjuration, and it gives you Rune of Observation. Now, Rune of Observation was actually Diviner's Sight, which was a divination spell. So they've done some mixing and matching with some of even the advanced schools, or school spells specifically, for essentially the curriculums. Now, I'm not going to go into like monitoring each spell, like what works, what doesn't work. You can, if you want, talk with your GM and switch some of the spells in your curriculum if you feel like it suits you more. It's really not a big deal. The extra spell slot, it really doesn't matter such a huge amount, whatever spell you put in that. The biggest thing is just kind of keeping on theme for your character for RP purposes. There's no combination of spells that you can have that will break the game, especially because even if you didn't have them in your curriculum slot, you could just have them in your 3 other spell slots at a given spell level anyway. So, it's not a big deal. And I like the change, honestly. Honestly, I don't even mind playing purely by what the book has written. Obviously, that's not the intent as they add more spells, But as the book has written, I mean, it's just something that like most others, like spellcasters, had to deal with. The clerics got certain spells based on their deity. Sorcerers got some extra spells sometimes as well. It was just something that everyone had, but wizard just had the most flexibility. And you could see that reduction of flexibility as being a little bit of a nerf, but really it's not. It's something that fleshes your character out more and makes them not just a spreadsheet for you to view. And if you want to do that, that's completely fine. You can still relatively do that. But now this offers a lot more narrativeness that the wizard really just didn't have before. So, other than that, let's go ahead and take a look at the next one, which is a big popular one, which is going to be the School of Battle Magic. Now, the School of Battle Magic predominantly focuses on attack spells and defense spells, anything you would use in combat, even spells like Earthbind that can bring enemies down to the ground that are flying. Now, they still keep Force Bolt, but now they take an energy absorption rather than, I believe it was elemental. What was it? I have a list here. I have a big list of the changes. Actually, some of the biggest changes came from Wizard, which is pretty insane. The Elemental Tempest, which Elemental Tempest has been removed from the game. It's no longer a focus spell that the wizard has because it used to belong to Evoker, which is no longer a school. This might upset some people, and I completely understand, and I think that's insanely valid. I wish they did just more mixing rather than just rearranging and then removing some of the spells, especially something from like Evoker, which I know is a very popular spell school before. But beyond that, I actually do genuinely like School of Battle Magic. I do like, if you want to play a combat wizard, it only makes sense that you want to take both offensive and defensive spells, and a list of other spells as well that are just handy to have in some situations. So that being the case, I thoroughly enjoy School of Battle Magic. Next up is School of the Boundary, and this one is predominantly focused on either stuff like telekinesis or things like summoning. It's altering dimensions and all that other kind of stuff as well. For instance, you get telekinetic hands as one of your initial cantrips. I don't know what Void Warp is. I'm sure it's just a rename spell. I didn't go through all the spells because, again, this would be a super long video as well. I will mention you do get Summon Undead here in this list, which is very interesting for a first level spell. Well, I guess maybe Phantasmal Minion is the lesser version of Summon Elemental. I'm actually not sure. But some of the Necromancy spells kind of got moved in here as well. Now, for a school that uses a lot of the conjuration stuff, it still has, well, it now has fortifying summoning rather than augmented summoning. Nothing changed. It's just, it changed the name from augmented summoning to fortify summoning, which some of the name changes, especially that Wizard got, was in their opinion something that made more sense to people who read them. They're like, we're going to change a lot of names anyway, so we might as well just make some of the spells name-wise make sense. I liked Augment Summoning more. I don't know why they needed to change it, but Fortify Summoning, it just does the same thing. They just changed the name for some reason. I don't know. Whether you like it or not, it is what it is. Spiral of Horrors is the advanced spell, and this is actually Dread Aura from the original one. So Dread Aura got changed to Spiral of Horrors. Otherwise, operates the same. Though I will say, Spiral of Horrors sounds way cooler than Dread Aura. Just, my own personal take. I do like the naming convention at least a little bit more. But yeah, so very interesting indeed. All right, next is School of Civic Wizardry, which is essentially any of the construct summoning, like Cozy Cabin, all that kind of stuff. Essentially, this is the one that focuses on creating objects. I actually really like this one. It takes a little bit from Transmutation, but its initial school spell and its advanced school spell are completely new to the game. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So first you get Earthworks, which is a 1 to 3 action spell, which I'm very big fan of multi or variable action spells. Now this spell has the Concentrate Earth, Manipulate Wizard, and Focus traits. Obviously it's a focus spell. And it has a range of 60 feet. It happens in a 5-foot burst or more depending on how many actions you put into it, and the effects last for a minute. So essentially what happens is you create the terrain, you create difficult terrain in a burst at up to 60 feet. Now, the spell burst is initially 5 foot, but for every additional action, it increases by another 5 foot burst. So it goes from 5 foot to 10 foot to 15 foot burst if you use all 3 actions. Now, a creature can clear the barriers in one of those squares with an interact action to fix things. Now, one of the interesting things about this focus spell is when you get up to fourth rank spell casting, you can also create floating barriers that in that same burst, you create essentially a cylinder of difficult terrain as well, that those creatures could, I guess, similarly like remove some of the debris in the air. This is just a good way to slow enemies down, whether it's a use of a focus point to you or not. I don't know. I thoroughly enjoy this one, but I feel like the best way to use it is always going to be the 2 action. A 5 foot burst, while, can be significant, is not going to be enough difficult terrain to really stop anyone from getting anywhere. So the 10 foot burst, I think, would have to be the minimum, and 15 foot being best. But spending all 3 actions just creating difficult terrain is, you know, it's something that's very situational. I feel like the 2 action version, I think, is plenty fine. Honestly, because it uses a focus point, I kind of wish that they extended the areas just a little bit more, but it does create a pretty sizable area of difficult terrain, especially at the max casting. So in any regard, it's good. Plus, I do love the fact that it can also mess with flying creatures as well. Next is community restoration, which is very interesting. It's a reaction, which I'm always a big fan of spell reactions, as typically spellcasters like wizards don't get a lot of reactions to use. Now, the trigger is you cast a spell from a wizard spell slot, and the spell affects one or more willing allies with it without damaging them. So you can't fireball your friends, even though they're willing, which has happened in some of our games sometimes. It can't damage them. But if you affect any more allies, buff anyone at all, you get a reaction where you can spend a focus point to gain 2 temporary hit points per spell rank of the triggering spell. You can grant an equal number divided as you choose among all allies affected by the triggering spell. These temporary hit points last for a minute. Now, this is, so it's going to be double the spell rank, right? That's not going to be a lot. Even at the highest level, 10th level, that's still going to be 20 temporary hit points, which is a lot. But if you're splitting it amongst multiple people, between 2 people is fine. Between 3 people, it starts getting less and less. So this is really good when you're buffing someone else. You can give that person the majority if you're buffing your frontliner, or you can split it between the 2, especially if you're feeling any in danger. I like community restoration a lot. It's a really good save in a situation where things are bad, or to help bolster your frontline fighters who are helping to protect you. So, in any case, community restoration, I think, is a really good advanced school spell. Next up is School of Mentalism. This is one that many people are aware of. This is the befuddling one that has been mentioned before. It predominantly focuses on any mental altering effects, whether that's through illusions, dazing, color spray, all that kind of stuff. It's a really good one, though I think color spray it got changed to dizzying colors, which is very interesting. Now, it has Charming Push, which was changed from the prior one, which I actually don't know why they changed this one either. It might have just been a popular one. I'm not sure. The list of name changes here is pretty, yeah. Charming Words got changed to Charming Push. I don't know. I don't know why, honestly. But yeah, so Charming Words is now Charming Push, whether, I agree with it or not. And now the School of Mentalism gets the Invisibility Cloak, which I think Illusion got before. So overall, this is kind of the illusory one. It's good if you're going into these kind of stuff. Obviously, if you enjoy the curriculum, you're going to like it. It has all the spells you're looking for, including Charming Push or Invisibility. Really good for a clandestine, cloak and dagger style of play if you're doing that kind of thing in your game. Not really much more to say about this one. Next up is School of Protean Form, which is the changing, any polymorph effects are going to be found here. as well as anything else that might change your form or ability, kind of transmutation, but not quite. Now, they do get a new spell called Scramble Body, which is pretty horrifying. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So, Scramble Body has a range of 30 feet. It can affect one creature on a Fortitude saving throw. It has the Concentrate, Focus, Manipulate, and Wizard trait. So, pretty much a standard spell. 2 actions, and essentially what it is you use the effect. If the target succeeds the check, they're unaffected. That's actually not super good in my opinion. But if they fail, they become sickened 1, and if they crit fail, they become sickened 2 and slowed 1 for as long as they're sickened. A really good critical effect, but I'm never a fan of spells that are save or suck kind of situations where the the person, if they save, nothing happens. Not a very good one. Don't get me wrong, sickened is a really good condition because sickened gives you a pretty big amount of nerfing, and they need to expend an action and succeed a save against your spell DC to get rid of it. Which, if the enemy has really bad fortitude saving throws, it can be really devastating. I understand the balance purpose of Scramble Body. When you're picking it up at level 1, either as a new player or an experienced player, this can be just something that is a lot more easily resisted at these level, making Scramble Body a very unappealing focus spell at early game. It gets better as you get higher spell proficiency, and Sickened again is a really good condition, even better than Frightened in many ways. But it just like early game feels kind of bad, and I guess that's just part of the Wizard thing of kind of bad early game, much better late game, even though that's not how Wizard really works in Pathfinder Second Edition, or at least in my opinion. In any regard, it's honestly not too bad. Now, the other spell they get, you can see here, is Shifting Form, which is the same from Transmutation before, so nothing really changed on that end. School of Unified Magical Theory is the Universalist spell, which again, I don't know why they changed, other than I guess it just sounds more like an actual spell school you would go to spell school you would go to rather than just being a universalist wizard, which is more of a title. But it has all the same effects. You don't have curriculum spell slots, so you lose a cantrip slot and you lose an extra spell slot every level, but instead you can use your drain bonded item every level. Now, it still has Hand of the Apprentice, which many people love and many people hate, but it also has a new advanced school spell, which is called Interdisciplinary Incantation. So let's take a look at that one. So this one is actually very interesting. It's also a reaction, which I really like, has the Concentrate, Focus, and Wizard traits, all that. Its trigger is a creature within 30 feet casts an arcane spell. Now, with this spell, you gather the embers of another caster's spell using your understanding of unified magic theory to pick apart their formula and incantation well enough to imitate the spell yourself, but only for a short amount of time. Until the end of your next turn, you can cast the triggering spell by expending a wizard spell slot of the same rank. The spells can't trigger your interdisciplinary. The caster's spell can't trigger your hard name, interdisciplinary incantation again for 24 hours. So this one is kind of a mixed bag for me. I do love the idea of being able to grab a spell, flip it back on the enemy. The problem is this uses a reaction, a focus point, and a spell slot to cast an enemy spell. I think that there's lots of fun ways this can be done. I love the fantasy behind it. Being a character who's so smart in magic, you saw someone use a spell and you twist your own magic. You can essentially change one of your own spell slots if you so choose to something that's more handy. And if it's an enemy casting it, then, it's going to be an offensive spell, or you can even use this to combo with your allies, as it can be any creature within 30 feet. So this has a lot of interesting implications. It just comes at a pretty serious cost, in my opinion. Whether you use this one or not, I love the fantasy behind it, and I think that this has really good character potential, but it does indeed kind of feel like it's just a very heavy cost. I I don't know. I I don't think removing any part of it, like the spell slot especially, would I think that would make this actually a super broken reaction, considering how easy it is to get focus points back. But that being the case, I do think that this one overall works as well as you would expect. So yeah, I this is a very interesting one, and it's very cool that the Universalist Mage essentially gains now an advanced domain spell, making it feel a lot better to go down it. Honestly, even though on the Universalist was always a lot of people's favorites anyway, I do like this spell, and I think it really works out for the idea of the Universalist style of mage. All right, now we're going to go on to the list of removed spells because there's actually quite a number of removed spells, mostly due to the removal of entire categories or spell categories as an idea. So, for instance, there's no longer physical boosts, which is a little unfortunate, but not a spell I feel like a lot of people are going to miss. There's also removed warped terrain, which, to be fair, essentially the Earthworks does the same thing ish. But there's no illusion version now, which is very interesting. No dimensional steps, which I think is a very sad loss. I already mentioned this, but there's also no longer an elemental tempest, nor is there life siphon anymore. A very interesting list. And as much as I would like to go into each of these steps, this video is already quickly approaching 30 minutes, as much as my recording is right now. So that being the case, this is the list. You can see right over here the list of removed focus spells from Wizard. Now, if there are any focus spells that were picked up, like from Secrets of Magic, for instance, those are the same. And I guess now's a really good point to make. Anything that came after Advanced Player's Guide is still considered like canonical to the game, is still a part of the game. The remaster has not removed anything that happened after the Advanced Player's Guide. The remaster is only reworking the core book and Advanced Player's Guide together to make it work better for their new intentions, to help differentiate themselves from D&D as much, and to increase clarity. And there's been a lot of really good changes. So honestly, it's just a major errata patch, but most of the classes honestly still play the same. So now we're going to go into the list of feats for the wizard. But before we do that, I'm going to make another mention again. If you're liking this content, please subscribe. It really helps the channel out. It gets this content out to more people. And there's not going to be people covering the new stuff as much as I'm going to be doing, I guarantee. So if you want to help as many other people see this content as possible, like, subscribe, and the like. But let's go ahead and start talking about the feats. Now, Wizard for the most part got most of their feats are the same, which I find is actually rather interesting, as they did lose some very good feats, in my opinion. Is very strange. First, Bespell Weapon got changed to Bespell Strikes. I don't know why, honestly. Maybe it was a thing before. I'm honestly not 100% sure. But yeah, so Bespell Weapon changed its name to Bespell Strikes. Works the same, nothing else changed, just name changed. Call Binded Item did slightly change. It's now called Call Wizardly Tools, and now you can call to yourself either your bonded item or your spell book within the same 1 mile range. I overall an improvement to this feat. It helps. I wish it would be both, but whatever. In any regard, this can be really handy. And again, the cool wizard thing of holding your hand up and your spell book just zooms into your hand and you catch it. Really cool. And honestly, I think a much needed change to the feat, as there were many people use like rings or stuff they would never typically use with the drain or their bonded items specifically. So that being the case, now you can call your spellbook, which I think, well, not as likely to happen, is still something that you want to happen if you're ever without your spellbook for whatever reason. So not a great feat, but one that I'm happy for the change for, at the very least. Now, one of the biggest changes is there's no longer silent spell. Right? Was it silent spell? I put my list away for a second here. There is no longer, yeah, silent spell. Instead, conceal spell, the level 2 version, more or less does the same thing. So spellcasting more or less got changed, where there's now these subtle traits, which makes it hard to notice. There's no obvious things that you can do. So silent spell kind of just became unnecessary, though I would still feel like under close scrutiny, silent spell would still be better, in my opinion. If we look at what silent spell does here, silent spell is you just cast without speaking words that you normally would. You still might need to wiggle your fingers just in case, but you can completely remove the verbal component. Now, verbal components no longer exist. Now, under conceal spell, as you can see here, you can see that this spell gains the subtle traits, making it hard to notice. And under the new rules for subtle spells specifically, they are spells that don't have any there's no indication that you're obviously casting magic necessarily. Now enemies might still, as you can see here, see like a ray of a ray streak streaking out from you. So overall, conceal spell essentially got a buff and is much better, and silent spell was removed in lieu of now the new subtle trait system. And I do think they removed from the spell rules that you no longer need to speak in a powerful voice when you're using a spell. So I guess spellcasting is just now generally more subtle, which honestly suits more people's needs. So many people wanted to do spells much more secretly, and I feel like Conceal Spell now does that a lot better than it used to. And with that being in mind, you don't even need to make a stealth check anymore, which is pretty good. It doesn't force you to spend sneak like the other conceal spell require that you need to make a stealth check against the observer's perception DCs. And there was all kinds of guff. So conceal spell got a huge buff, pretty much replaced silent spell, even though again I could argue that silent spell could have been better just in some situations because conceal spell doesn't completely remove everything you're doing. They're just much more subtle, and so it's not obvious that you're doing something. So I don't know. Conceal spell getting a huge buff and silent spell being removed, I think overall works out, and now you no longer need to invest in stealth if you want to cast spells very subtly. I feel like conceal spell is just going to be a very standard pick for most wizard builds going forward. Very meta, which, whether you like it or not, is just going to be the case. All right, we did get another new feat another new feat. We did get a new feat, there we go, at level 4 called Spell Protection Array, which is a singular action. It has the manipulate trait, so you gotta be careful of reactive strike. And essentially, you create within a 5-foot burst on the ground, anywhere within 30 feet, a magic circle. Creatures in this circle gain a +1 status bonus to saving throws against magic effects specifically. The circle lasts until the end of your next turn, or you can sustain it to a maximum duration of a minute. A really good action, honestly, very solid. I love wizards who use like magic circles on the ground for things, and protection array is really cool. It's a really fun action. I actually really like this one a lot. It has really good visual flair. It does protect you from magic, which honestly is really good, though that does mean that some enemies might be using this against you as well. So, and that's even something that you can play around with. And because it needs to be sustained, you're more likely to just stay in place and cast spells, which creates that risk reward that I really like, especially from Final Fantasy XIV, if you're familiar with playing Black Mage. So the Spell Protection Array, I think, is really cool and very good. Another new feat, but it's not actually a new feat. They actually stole Explosive Arrival from Summoner. Now, interestingly, it operates the same, which is we'll get into a conversation later about Summoner and how Explosive Arrival sucks for Summoner, ironically. But yeah, so now a wizard can use a free action to spell shape a conjuration spell, predominantly with the summoning trait, that creates a 10-foot explosion of some kind of elemental damage based on the type of summon that you do. It's good. If you like summoning, this is going to be really good. And if you're playing a conjuration style, or not conjuration, what is that new school? Beyond the Boundary? I don't know why I'm saying it like that. School of the Boundary. it's, I think, going to be one of your hotly picked choices. I mean, letting your summoning spell not only giving your summon 2 actions when you use it, but also doing an explosion that does 10 or does a d4 damage in addition to everything. It just makes something better, honestly, which there's really no reason not to take it, especially because there's very few spell shapes you can apply to summoning anyway. So Explosive Arrival just works. The before it was from the Advanced Player's Guide, it was called Spell Penetration. Its name got changed to Irresistible Magic. It does the same thing. It makes it so that creatures that do have magic resistance have 1 less against you. This is one of those ones that got changed because the name just didn't make sense. Spell Penetration felt like something that your spells would cut through enemy resistances. That's not what it did. It just made enemies who were magically resistant or to like saves and everything have 1 less. So now Irresistible Magic just reduces that bonus by 1, which for most creature just completely removes it. So yeah, same thing. The name just makes a little bit more sense now. All right, Wizard did get another new feat called Knowledge is Power. This one's a very interesting one because it's based on Recall Knowledge. Essentially, when you critically succeed a Recall Knowledge check about a creature, you can invoke your knowledge to make that creature take a -1 circumstance penalty to their AC and saves against the next attack you make against it or the next spell you cast that it needs to defend against. Now, the creature also takes a similar penalty to its attack or DC the next time it uses an attack or ability on you that causes you to make a save. Once you can also disseminate this information to your allies, which gives them the same benefits, though the bonuses end after a minute. Or sorry, but you can choose. They can choose to use this, but if they don't use the bonuses after a minute or before a minute, then it ends. So this happened, and there's no immunity to this. So every time you can crit the Recall Knowledge, which does get harder, I might add, but you can crit it multiple times to get this multiple ways. Not bad if you're a wizard who's using a lot of Recall Knowledge checks, which I know Recall Knowledge got a little bit of a buff that people are very hyped about. This is a pretty cool feat, in my opinion. So if that's a style play you're going for, I think this is a really good feat and a really good change. All right. Scroll Savant got changed to Scroll Adepts. That's it. Name change. That's all. Not even really worth mentioning all too much. Nothing changed on the feat. At level 12, Diviner Sense got changed to Magical Detection. Again, nothing really changed, so you don't need to worry. Now, something I am quite curious about, and I guess is just because Wizard didn't have it before. I know I checked before I made this video. Wizard doesn't have any feats that gives them extra focus points back when they, refocus, which is very interesting. Many classes ended up getting a level 12 feat where this happens, and Wizard didn't. So, I mean, Wizard didn't have it before, so I guess it just makes sense because it's not a focus point focused style of class. It was just something I guess I was kind of expecting that didn't happen. So pretty much only classes that really have a high focus on using focus points gained a feat at around level 12 that gave them all their focus points back when they refocus. Just something I figured I'd mention. It was just something that I noticed, but Wizards didn't have it before. They didn't have any feats that gave them back their focus points faster. So I guess it just made sense. All right, at level 14, Wizard got a new array feats. It's called Secondary Detonation Array, which since the last array spell was really cool, this one might be as well. Now it has a single action. It is a spell shape, so same rules for spell shape. And you divert some of the spell's energy into an unstable runic array. If your next action is to cast a spell that deals damage, has no duration, and affects an area, like a fireball for instance, a glowing magic circle appears in a 5-foot burst within the area that you created. At the beginning of your next turn, the circle detonates, dealing 1d6 force damage per rank of the spell to all creatures within the circle, with a basic reflex save equal to or against your spell DC. Now, if the spell dealt a different type of damage, the circle deals this type of damage instead. So with Fireball, for instance, it would do fire damage. I like this one. It's very interesting. You can attach this to a fireball, throw it, and then you create a 5-foot burst within the area that will explode at the beginning of your next turn, which is good, but honestly, it's spending an action that's forcing enemies to move or take more damage. Not necessarily a bad trade off, but I feel like people aren't going to be able to get this effect off as much as they want unless the effects are immobilizing enemies. And there's probably some really good effects that do immobilize enemies somewhat that don't immobilize them for a duration because the spell can't have a duration. So, but it needs to affect an area. I feel like there's a lot of fun ways that this one can be used for sure. It's just one of those feats specifically that I feel like are going to be fun when you find the right spell that hits it. I'm sure there's going to be someone who's going to do a really cool theory craft around this feat specifically. But overall, it's mostly just expending a action to force enemies to move out of an area for under threat of taking more damage. So, but a double explosion fireball does sound really cool. So I like this feat overall. Now, Spell Tinker didn't change its name, which is very surprising considering how frequently they change names for wizard abilities. But Spell Tinker did get an actual change to how it works. Now, whenever you change the effects through Spell Tinker, you no longer reduce the duration of whatever spell you're tinkering in half. This is actually good. This makes Spell Tinker actually worth taking, as before you would reduce like a 1 minute spell down to like 5 rounds, which would still technically work and worked in most situations. I think it was initially designed to be balanced that way. But now you're just no longer punished for changing it, which, to be fair, it's a 2-action, like it was a 2-action thing before that just was very niche and reduced your spell's duration in half, which made it very unappealing. Now it's still 2 actions, but at the very least, people might want to actually use it now. So yeah, Spell Tinker got a little bit better. Whether you used it before or not, well, now you got a buff. So Second Chance spell got a slight difference, and I don't know exactly how I feel about it. So what Second Chance spell did before is if an enemy crit succeeded against one of your enchantment spells, on your next turn, you could attempt that same spell again, but on a different enemy, though you don't get any of the benefits of casting from a spell slot. But this also doesn't consume a spell slot, which made it pretty okay. Now it's a reaction, so it's a reaction that you need to expend essentially on your turn, which is interesting. And what happens is now it works on any spell that has the mental trait and the enemy succeeds or crit succeeds on a will save. So it is better because it doesn't need to, 1, be specifically an enchantment spell, but 2, now just works on any kind of enchantment spell or an enchantment spell, any kind of mental spell that requires a will save, which I think does expand its area quite a bit, but you still need to cast it on your next turn, though again, you still don't spend an additional spell slot. So and you can't use second thought spell again on the second casting. If that enemy crit succeeds, then you're just very unfortunate. But yeah, it's one that now it consumes a reaction, which I find is an extra cost, though it does slightly expand. It needs to be a mental spell that has a will save. There are probably more of those than there were enchantments to begin with, but it doesn't feel like enough to make it warrant the use of an extra reaction to do so. Honestly, I wish as a part of the reaction, you could just at that moment attempt the spell again. And that's what I thought it was. I actually had to re-record this because I read it. It says you can cast the triggering spell a second time, targeting a different creature without expending a spell slot. That's what it sounds like. But then it states you can do so only until the end of your next turn, and you can't use second thought on it after the second casting of the spell. So this means one of 2 things. Because they specify the time, either you can use this reaction. No, because it has to be on the trigger. Yeah. So essentially, it means that on your next turn, you need to spend whatever actions to cast the spell again. So yeah, that kind of sucks, honestly. Now it uses a reaction, and you need to cast on your next turn for a slightly expanded profile. I don't know exactly how I feel about it, in all honesty, but it is a change. So maybe someone, who is smarter can tell me more about what they feel this particular feat does in difference to what it did before. But yeah, that it is what it is. All right, and one last name change for the list here. Meta Magic Mastery is now changed to Spell Shape Mastery. Works exactly the same. They just removed Meta Magic and put in Spell Shape. So yeah, so that's gonna be Wizard. Now the curriculums were obviously a big change, and this video has gone on almost as long as the Witch video. Probably not quite as long as most of the Wizard changes. I felt like honestly a programmer who was just putting out a list of changes, because most of it was just they changed one name to a different name for reasons, you know. I do want to at some point address many of the new spells that are changed, or at least compile a list of spells that have changed. But that's just going to be it for another time. But yeah, so that's going to be it for the Wizard, the remaster Wizard. Honestly, not much changed. Mostly names, you know. Curriculums are cool. I do like curriculums. I do like the fact that now you can specialize your wizard more around a theme than a specific school. Sometimes if you went like abjuration, it just felt bad. It felt bad going abjuration because sometimes there just wasn't enough spells to really warrant it. Now with like the Ars Grammatica, for instance, now you have a lot more spells that you can use in a lot of varied ways to make it more diverse. That Wizard got a lot of flack, I feel like, for some of the changes. Also, some of the changes to cantrip damage, which we're not going into here. We'll go into that during the spell section of probably next week at some point. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts on the Wizard changes are. And yeah, that's going to be it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And stay tuned, because tomorrow we're going to be talking about the Cleric changes, as Cleric actually got some pretty significant buffs that I'm very excited to talk about. So stay tuned for that tomorrow.